Braising is a cooking method using both dry and moist heat. Braising is perfect for cuts of meat that benefit from a longer, slower cooking time. As a general rule, tender cuts of meat come from muscles that are less used, while tougher cuts of meat come from working muscles. It's these working muscles that are perfect for braising. With slow heat in a moist environment, these muscles become tender and intensely satisfying. In the case of lamb, the cuts that are most commonly associated with braising include the shoulder, the neck, and both the hind and foreshank. Stewing is a similar technique to braising, but uses small pieces of meat such as lamb stew meat. Lamb stew meat generally comes from the shoulder and leg. The slow simmering of a stew is excellent for combining the flavors of many different ingredients in one dish. Both braising and stewing rely on moderate heat, ample time and moisture to break down the tough connective tissues in the meat. Braising changes the connective tissue into collagen. As the cooking continues, the collagen then breaks down and dissolves into gelatin. The result of this process? You end up with a very tender piece of meat. By the way, the liquid that the meat cooks in is critically important as it flavors the meat and also helps keep the meat moist. Remember to only braise meat in highly flavorful liquids, as they will, along with the meat juices, create an incredibly flavorful and memorable dish. Most braises follow these same basic steps. First, the meat is seared to brown its surface and enhance the dish's flavor and color. Second, mirepoix or other aromatic vegetables are sautéed. A small amount of liquid is then added to the pot. This could be water, stock, juice, beer, or wine. Other flavorful ingredients like herbs and spices are then added. Depending on the braise, a tomato product may also be added to contribute color and yet more flavor. Third, the pot is covered tightly and the meat is simmered over low heat until the meat is fork tender. Braising can be done on the stovetop, but it's best done in the oven, so the heat will fully surround the pot, causing the dish to cook more evenly than if it were simply heated from below. The low heat is a major factor in the success of the braise. High heat will toughen and dry out the meat. A successful braise will intermingle the flavors of a meat such as lamb and the cooking liquid. While braising, the collagen from the meat dissolves into gelatin and enriches and adds body and shine to the liquid. The cooking liquid from a braised dish may be served as is, reduced to a sauce consistency, or thickened with a roux or slurry. One of the most popular lamb dishes on menus today is a braised lamb shank. Lamb foreshanks as well as hind shanks are used in braising. Here's one of my favorite recipes: braised lamb shank and kale. The recipe for braised lamb shanks and kale begins like a classic braise. I have a rondo or a braising pan over here that's hot and ready to start searing the meat. Critically important, it must be very hot because the point of the searing is to develop as much color on the meat as possible, as quickly as possible. So I'm going to take a little bit of oil and put it into the pan. Again, very hot pan. At that point, I have four shanks from the lamb. I'm going to go ahead and put these into the braising pan. And I'm going to let this saute, and I'm going to sear it and keep moving these around so that by the time these are seared, they should be seared on all surfaces. You don't want to leave any part of that that's sort of white. It must be nice, deep brown color, because that's going to give you the flavor and that's going to give you the color in the finished dish. Once the shanks are well browned, you can see them right over here. Again, browned on all surfaces. At that point, we're going to take them out of the pan, put them off to the side, and then in the same pan, I've started sautéing some mirepoix. Now this mirepoix is a little bit different than the classical mirepoix because it's red onions and celery, and there's no carrots in it at all. One of the beauties of a braise is that it's a vehicle for lots of different flavors. The technique remains the same, but you can flavor it a multitude of different ways. And what we're going to do now that our mirepoix has browned, I'm going to go ahead and put in a lot of minced garlic. I really want to bring out a strong garlic profile in terms of the flavor. And if you also notice, very importantly, is that you cook the mirepoix first. And then once the mirepoix is cooked, then in goes the garlic. There's a very simple reason for that. The reason is that the mirepoix is cut larger and the garlic is really almost minced up. If you put them together, the garlic is going to burn before the mirepoix is cooked. So in this case, you cook the mirepoix, you toss in the garlic. We're just going to cook it for about a minute or so just to bring out the flavor of the garlic. Again, I want strong garlic in this recipe. Once that's done, well, now I can do lots of different things. We're going to start with some strong dark stock and then lots of other flavorings. So watch this. We're going to take a whole bunch of tomato sauce and put that right into the pan. Now in goes some of the flavorings. I have here some whole fennel seed. Sprinkle those into our braising liquid along with some black pepper, and I have some fresh thyme leaves and a little bit of salt. Sprinkle that in. The last thing I need to put in, well, our lamb shanks that we lovingly browned just a bit earlier. I'm going to put that right into the braising liquid, move that around, and at this point what I need to do is bring this up to a simmer, and once it hits a simmer, I'm going to go ahead and take the lid, cover the pan, put it in the oven, a 275 to 300 degree oven, and we're going to cook it very slowly for about, well, 3.5 hours until the meat is very tender. And at that point, we're going to make our sauce. So our shanks have come out of the oven, and they're beautifully tender. Talk about melt in your mouth. Look at this, just sort of, when we talk about fork tender, that meat is just about falling off the bone. And when you have meat like that, that is just delicious. But that's only one part of our braise, because remember, we cook it in this liquid, and the liquid becomes the sauce, and it's incredibly rich. We talked about the gelatin earlier. That's where we're going to get all the flavor and the texture. First thing we need to do is we're going to bring this up to a boil so we can skim away the fat that rises to the surface. And you can see it right here. There's a little bit more I'm going to take off right over here. You want to be sure you get as much of the fat off the top of the liquid as you can. Look at that. Beautiful. And the next step in our sauce is to thicken it. Now, you may not need to thicken it. That's really your choice. You can take a look and see how thick it is, because as this cooks, it's going to reduce down a little bit. And again, you get all the gelatin in there. That's going to help thicken it. If you want to thicken the sauce a little bit, you can do a couple things. You can put in a roux into there, or you can even boil it down a little bit. Or what I'm going to do right here is I just have a little bit of cornstarch and cold water. I'm going to mix that together and turn that into our slurry. There we go. And I'm just going to whisk that right into the sauce. Doesn't take much, and one of the things to remember with the slurry, be sure to bring this up to a boil, because the cornstarch won't really thicken until the liquid is at a full boil. A lot of times people put some in and wait a minute, it doesn't thicken, then they put a bunch more in, and then when it finally comes up to a boil, it's too thick. So always let it boil. And then once it comes to a boil, you can see exactly if it's thick enough, or if you'd like to perhaps put a little bit more slurry in. The other thing you can do with the braise is to take the liquid at this point and strain it. In this recipe, we're not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to leave the mirepoix in here. It's sort of more of a rustic presentation. But once again, you can certainly put this through a chinois or a strainer. On to our garnish. Because with the braise, you can do a lot of different things. You have beautifully cooked meat, you have the beautiful sauce, but we can put other things into the braise as well. In this recipe, we're going to put kale into the braise. And kale is this right over here. It's a fairly tough green. It's incredibly nutritious. And what you want to do is take out the stem right over here, because the stem tends to be fairly tough. I'm just going to remove that. At this point, I would take the kale leaves, put them in boiling salted water, and cook them just until they start to become tender, like this right over here. At this point, they're ready to go into our braising liquid. And what I'm going to do is just very simply take the cooked kale leaves, put them right into the braising liquid, and this not only is going to give it a great flavor, but it's going to add a wonderful color to your sauce as well. We'll cook this for just a few minutes until the kale just becomes a bit more tender. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and take our lamb shanks, put them right into the liquid, and when those shanks are good and hot, it's ready to serve. This braised lamb shank recipe, as well as others, can be found on the American Lamb Board website. For more information and lamb recipes, visit www.americanlamb.com.